And today we're going to have a shorter chat of 30 minutes with Mariel, and it'll be a bit more informal in a chatty manner. And if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We're going to address it either as we go along or at the end. Now, please allow me to introduce Mariel in more detail. She's been, first, I need to say that she has been so nice and patient and diligent in helping us to prepare the sessions. I'm very grateful to her for this. Let me give you a couple of details about Mariel. She's, as I said, the Secretary General of the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, and she's responsible for international dispute resolution services and operates in Hong Kong, Seoul, and Shanghai. She's an international commercial and investment arbitration practitioner. And before joining HKIAC, she was a partner at CMS and co-head of the global CMS International Arbitration Group. She has an amazing 15 years of experience in international arbitration, and she is also fluent in German. So something you will not expect for the majority of us who speak one or two languages, but having German in the CV, I think that's an achievement. Mariel is also a past co-chair of the Hong Kong International Arbitration Committee of 45 young practitioners, and she is a member of the Women in Law Hong Kong Advisory Board. And that's not all. She also has a PhD summa cum laude from University of Basel and an LLM from Cologne. I think we can kick off our session, and I would like first to hear from Mariel about what are the latest trends that you've seen since you work at HKIAC involving digital asset disputes? If you have seen an evolution in time, what are your first impression about this phenomenon in the last year? And what I'm talking about digital asset is just an umbrella term to include crypto, NFT, as those new technologies that give us a headache at the moment.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Mihaela. I'm very happy to be here today. And I think the word about patience and perseverance and getting this session to become a reality applies equally to you as it does to me. So I'm very glad that we're able to do this together finally. From the HKIAC's perspective, and I should preface everything that I'm about to say, I was hoping by today we would have our 2023 statistics audited and finalised, but unfortunately we are all at capacity and that won't happen for another couple of weeks. So I can talk generally about growth and trends, but I can't talk about specific numbers for 2023 just yet. But in any case, we've seen a growth in the fintech area over a number of years now. We've had cases, I've pulled out data from the last 6 years where we've had a steady increase in what we categorize as fintech cases. I should mention that, as with most institutions, the way you categorize is an imperfect science. We categorize fintech itself generally. That can include things like the more general reference to crypto disputes. It may have ancillary references to crypto and fintech in there. And there may equally be other cases that are not quite captured by this category because they fall more naturally under another category. But in any case, we categorize fintech under the corporate finance category of our main sectors for the time being. And in 2022, at least, that was our largest sector. So just in terms of our main sectors, we have a corporate sector and we have a financing sector, and these are usually, depending on the year, our top two sectors in terms of our statistics. So with the increase in fintech disputes for us in 2022, that was the driving factor that led us to having that category as the main sector for that year. In terms of the types of disputes we have, I think we will turn to this later, Mihaela, so I don't want to preempt anything, but we have sort of the classic run-of-the-mill things, and I know that that's quite a contradiction in terms considering how new this area is, but where, for example, the online platform was allegedly unavailable or things like that, or where something happened in the transfer of a digital asset which was not according to plan or according to what they had agreed upon, and someone's claiming a loss as a result of that. What we are seeing is mainly individual claimants, not necessarily individual respondents. And in terms of nationalities of claimants, I was quite surprised myself to see the very, very broad range of what we're experiencing. And I can't even really discern a trend in nationalities there. There's so many different ones. So it's certainly a very international area for us. And I'll stop there and see if you've got any follow-up questions.
I was curious, you mentioned that the corporate and finance sector is the predominant one. Is it because of the increased number of fintech-related cases, or is just in general is the most predominant one?
So in 2022, it was one of the main reasons that was the top sector for HKIAC. However, having said that, it's always one of the top two. Without wanting to disclose anything, I suspect that finance won't be the top sector for 2023. What we also see a predominance of are what I would call the classic corporate disputes, shareholding disputes, IPO, share buyouts, things that haven't gone to plan in the follow-up to a transaction, those kinds of things. So while in 2022, that was one of the factors that led it to be in the top category, it's not something that continues necessarily in that way every year. So those two sectors always seem to compete, and there's a variety of reasons for that, including the increase in fintech disputes.
I see. So the crypto winter is reflected a bit in the cases we have less. It's likely to have less cases than
I think the crypto winter might even cause a few more cases, to be honest, because the crypto winter itself has caused claimants, and I'm talking very generally here, to believe they have claims. And as it turns out, a few years ago, the regulatory regime in Hong Kong was such that we were attractive for fintech disputes. So we're finding that quite a few of standard terms and conditions out there with relation to fintech have us in there. So the crypto winter has probably made people a bit hungry or a bit eager for vindication. So that actually might result in an increase in cases for us.
Yes, and I think it's a bit of delay between the moment when the problem appears and the moment when they will start lodging a claim. So who knows, maybe 2024 will be again a pickup on crypto or NFT related disputes.
Well, what I can disclose is that we're 24 days into 2024 and we've already got a fintech related case. So
okay, so it looks very promising.
There we go.
It seems that the arbitral institution we're going to be busy in the coming years. You touch a bit on, who are the claimants, where are they based, and so on, and a bit on the legal issues. Anything else you could say about the cases in terms of main characteristic? Of course, I know you cannot enter in details and you need to keep the confidentiality, but if you can talk about the disputes in general.
Sure. No, that's totally fine. And I mean, there's one group of cases which did make it to the public domain, at least in a very early phase, where it was essentially based on allegations around the functionality of the trading platform. Equally, we're seeing cases in which a loss is claimed from an alleged outage of a trading platform, or where it's being claimed that certain conditions between the contracting parties to a crypto transaction were not fulfilled. So, I mean, we've had this discussion in different contexts about sort of the true fintech crypto nature of these disputes. But to make a very big generalization, I think when you boil it down with our cases, at the heart of most of these is a contractual dispute. So someone's alleging breach of contract essentially, and the other side is presumably not in agreement with that allegation, and that's how they've ended up in arbitration. So
in a sense, there are similarities between these disputes and what we call classical disputes, the one we're a bit more familiar with. But if you were to compare the two, what are let's say, the main characteristics of the more common things that you see in digital asset disputes?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, I think just in terms of our institutional role and the procedural side of things, which is generally where we get involved and where our interest lies, we've had a lot of I shouldn't say that. We've had inquiries as to whether or not we're going to introduce a specialized subset of our rules, for example, for these kinds of disputes. And we toyed with that idea for quite a while, and without saying where we will go in the future, I don't think there is appetite right now for a whole subset of the rules, because we'd like to think that our normal administered arbitration rules are flexible enough to manage these types of disputes. And we're seeing in our cases that are fintech/crypto related a broad range of the way these things are run. And this is not a product of it being a crypto dispute, but a product of the sophistication of the legal representatives of the parties. So we've got cases where both parties are represented by sophisticated counsel. You know, to make a gross generalization, this is run like every other case. There's strategy, there's agreement, there's positioning. Equally, we have claimants who are self-represented, who have found this clause in their contract and are having a go at getting what they believe they're entitled to, very unsophisticated from a legal perspective. So that's where essentially as an institution, you probably have a bit more to do, because the parties need more help in getting the case up and running, which is where we come in until the file is transferred to the arbitral tribunal, after which we essentially take on a monitoring role, I should say. So yeah, there's some, I wouldn't say there's any key characteristics of these disputes. It's really coming down to the counsel that are representing them and whether or not they're being tactical in their approaches. So it's largely reflective of the classic disputes in that respect.
Do you have a sense that the parties will look for a mechanism that is faster or a bit different than the current mechanism?
Well, we do have an expedited procedure mechanism within our existing rules where if the parties agree, that applies. If not, we look at the threshold amount and other aspects of the case. And we are seeing with the nature of fintech disputes that a lot of them are, at least compared to classic disputes, what we would call low value. So some of them are suitable for the expedited procedure, and we are seeing this issue being discussed and raised to us. For example, in the notice of arbitration, where the claimant or the claimants will say, we think this case is suitable for the expedited procedure under the HKIAC rules, and we will go off and do our analyses. So I think that in particular, and this is an example of the flexibility of the rules, that will give a lot of fintech disputing parties some comfort that provided they are within that lower threshold and they can essentially argue that the case is not complicated and such to be, able to be resolved within a 6-month period, we will see, I think, an increase in these kind of cases being put through the expedited procedure.
So I see. I kind of anticipated that in time was of the essence in this type of disputes, and it's good to have this confirmation that they tend to go to the fast track, let's say, procedure. I know, for example, that some arbitral institutions, and I'm not sure how it works with HKIAC, but I know some arbitral institutions, after they have a case, they will send a feedback form to the parties to see how the arbitrators perform, what would they think about the procedure. And so is this something that HKIAC has? And if it does, and if you can disclose, have you seen any feedback in this regard from the parties involved in crypto or NFT related disputes?
It's very interesting that you've raised that. I mean, we don't have a feedback form, which is the short answer. The longer answer is that we have other ways of collecting feedback. And I mean, just to sort of preface why we don't have one, and we do discuss this regularly, and it regularly comes up. And we're in the process of revising our rules now that will be released this year. It also came up in those conversations. Essentially, the general essence of the hesitation is that the outcome of the dispute is probably going to influence a party's assessment of the arbitrators, and not necessarily of the institution, which presumably would be part of that. But from the arbitrator side, we monitor our cases, we see the awards, I read most of the awards, we have sort of internal mechanisms for seeing how well something's worked. And of course, there's just the simple ad hoc way that if a party is not happy, if something's taking too long, they can always call us up, and they do call us up to complain. Sometimes it's on the arbitrators, sometimes it's the other party playing games or not responding. Occasionally, of course, it might be on us, but we haven't seen specific feedback in fintech style disputes. I mean, a lot of this is largely because most of these cases are fairly recent and a lot of them are still ongoing. But one of the things that we can always do is to simply seek some comments, particularly in this very sort of new growing area where we know as an institution we're going to have a fair few more to deal with over the coming years. We can always just reach out, and it's probably an idea that we could be following to see how parties are finding our rules as being used in these disputes and whether there's any specific comments they'd like to make in that respect.
I see. So we're waiting to see what happens in the future and maybe get some feedback from the parties. I know you mentioned that a good part of this disputes are low value disputes, so I imagine there'll be one arbitrator instead of a panel of 3. What are the trends in terms of the characteristics the parties look into when they want to appoint an arbitrator for this type of disputes? Is there technical background of relevance or not? Do they go with the most experienced one in the arbitration community, even if that person does not have exposure to this type of technology? And I'm asking this question because I actually spoke with someone who's a very experienced arbitrator and been in the field for many years. And even if he worked for many, many years, he's not very familiar with the sector. And eventually what he told me when he got appointed in this type of case, he said, well, it's kind of the same as the other disputes. Of course, it has technicality, but also oil and gas has their technicality. So they didn't see as a problem not having exposure to this technology or not understanding it fully. So I'm curious to know, what are the criteria that you see when people are pointing? Or
well,
if you can,
I'm looking at the list of
participants. The portrait of the arbitrator sitting in digital asset disputes.
Well, I'm looking at our list of participants here, and I can see at least 3 people that we've appointed as arbitrator in digital disputes. So I think the answer is right there. No, in all seriousness, I think, okay, there's 2 nuances here. There is our appointment mandate as an institution, and there is parties' nominations that we are then required to confirm. As a very general statement, we generally respect the nominations of the parties, and we would not look at someone and say, do they have enough sector dispute to do this? Leaving that to one side, when we appoint as an institution, we are generally very risk averse. So this is the opportunity for everyone who's listening. This is an area where we need more arbitrators, and we will look at the nature of the dispute. Is it fintech? Is it crypto? Do the candidates that we've got in mind have this experience? What kind of experience have they sat as arbitrator? Have they published? What can we see to reassure ourselves that we're going to put someone in? And I don't disagree with the statement that a lot of the way, and if you're an experienced arbitrator, you're probably going to be able to handle a fintech dispute as a matter of procedure. But on the off chance that there's a very sort of nitty-gritty fintech question in there, we certainly don't want to appoint someone who might not be able to deal with that point, particularly keeping in mind, as you said, Mihaela, that a lot of these cases go to a sole arbitrator. So there's no way for anyone to hide. If you're the sole arbitrator, it starts and ends with you. So if you don't know what you're talking about, to put it bluntly, you're probably going to have a bit of a rough time sitting there. So we will try to reassure ourselves that there is sector expertise, realizing, of course, that because the sector is new and growing, there might be analogous expertise, for want of a better term, if we're, for whatever reason, down to a very small pool of eligible candidates. So if someone has TMT experience or IP experience, we will look at those individuals on a case-by-case basis if we're short of names to say, okay, what have they actually done in those sectors? Can we, bridge the gap to a fintech dispute, and do we think they can handle it?
I know you spoke a bit before about the institution thinking to revise rules or not, and to adapt it for tech-related disputes. What are the institution's plans in the future regarding digital asset disputes, whether it's in relation to the rules, or maybe training, or anything that we see coming from HKIAC, of course, to the extent you can disclose.
No, of course, and I mean, I'm at liberty to disclose a lot of things, but the short answer to this is that, short of changing our rules, which for the time being we won't do with respect to creating a subset of rules for fintech disputes, our mandate in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is such a fintech hub, is to ensure that we are aware of the legal developments in this jurisdiction and in the region that may have an impact on our caseload. And as you know, Hong Kong's made recent change, or you probably know far better than me, Hong Kong has made recent changes to its laws in that respect. Whether or not that will result in new disputes is probably, as you mentioned before, there's probably going to be a time lag in that respect. But for us, it's about being across it. It's about talking to people like yourself and the people we appoint as arbitrators in these disputes about the market, about where they see it's going, if there's any incidents in the sort of sector side of things that they think are going to result in disputes going forward. And also looking at whether or not HKIAC clauses are still being inserted into these kinds of disputes, whether it's the general terms or otherwise. But apart from that, I don't think from an administrative perspective, we're going to change anything rapidly. I mean, we've got certain counsel on our case management team who are more familiar than others in dealing with these types of cases. But because our administrative mandate is essentially quite limited, our key point in getting this right is to make sure we appoint the right arbitrators. So that's our biggest exercise in this space, is to make sure we're across the people who are good and versed with this sector, who can run a case efficiently, who know what they're talking about, who'll be able to handle the tech, those kinds of things.
Is the institution looking perhaps to have trainings on this particular topic, or you leave that to the individuals?
Do you mean trainings for us or us giving trainings?
Trainings for internally, and maybe trainings for future potential arbitrators, or trainings for parties to understand better what is arbitration in relation to this type of disputes.
I mean, we have done isolated events, at least in the past couple of years, with a crypto/fintech focus, where we've essentially gotten in the expertise from the sector, usually people we appoint or who we know are very robust in this area in the market, and we offer our institutional perspective on how parties can, do this as an efficient procedure if that's what they're after. I don't think we would do sector trainings as such, simply because we very rarely do sector trainings. It's very much getting the input from the sector, and whether that's fintech, construction, maritime, whatever, and getting input from people about where the nits are. So is the arbitrator pool too small? Are we not appointing the right people? Is this particular provision in our rules causing a headache because something is so prevalent in that sector that it keeps coming up? Like those kinds of things. So we're making sure we're keeping our users as happy as possible, but also being aware of the limited content-based mandate we have in this respect.
No, I imagine. I mean, the institution is managing many other sectors, so it makes sense to balance things out. I know we are running a bit of time. If you have anything to add on this topic, please. If not, we go to the question, and I see 2 questions in the chat from Sophie.
Great. Thank you, Sophie, for these questions. What we attribute to HKIAC's popularity as a choice. The way I
Sophie
understand
is about to jump in and ask the question.
I'm glad we've got
no. I mean, Mariel can read them as well as I can, and so does everybody on this chat. But perhaps for the purposes of the recording, I was just asking. But I think you've answered this to a degree, because I am struck by the popularity of your institution in those sorts of disputes, which is fantastic, obviously. But I just wondered. And you mentioned the regulatory environment, the legal environment. Did you target this industry in any way? I mean, is there, to what else do you attribute the popularity? Is it the expedited rules, perhaps, that you have, or the types of disputes you've handled in the past? I'm just curious.
I think it's a combination of factors. And I mean, when I came into this role, there was a large number of fintech cases that had already come through the door. But as I understand, also anecdotally to some extent, and to another extent not. I mean, Hong Kong's always been a financial hub, and I think that has extended, supported by the stakeholders in Hong Kong, into turning Hong Kong itself into what people here like to call a fintech hub. As I mentioned before, I think the regulatory framework a few years ago, at least from a PR perspective, was such that we made it into terms and conditions of quite a few of these platforms. However, we're not just seeing cases from those platforms, but of course, I think it kind of goes around in circles because, as I understand it, and I'm not at home in this world, but people will see what's being done in other parts of the sector and use the same clause or refer to the same institution. And then I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because we have the experience dealing with the disputes. We know the arbitrators, we can do it efficiently, and then hopefully we get more of the same type of thing. In terms of understanding the tech crypto culture, which was the second comment you made, I think that is certainly part of it. But again, we lean on the arbitrators we appoint, and the biggest thing for us is making sure we get it right with the appointment process. If someone comes to us and says, this aspect of your rules really doesn't work for crypto, we would certainly react to that. But as I mentioned, the expedited procedure part of it, because it's so flexible and we are quite a light touch institution in terms of our rules, it's essentially on the arbitrator to make it fit. And we haven't seen any big issues.
Yeah, I mean, I made that comment when you were mentioning in response to Mihaela's point about the person she spoke to who said, well, I mean, a case is a case is a case, and a technical case is a technical case. It's all, I can get to grips with, and I would respectfully add to that, well, not quite, because it's quite a peculiar, certainly the crypto culture is very much its own culture. And I think to understand what that sector wants in terms of output, of disputes and solutions is something that is quite important in my view anyway. I don't know if you share that.
No, I fully agree. And I don't think, I was saying if an experienced arbitrator gets a dispute of this procedurally, they'll probably be able to run it. But equally, as a sole arbitrator, the value of in dispute of a lot of these, you're not going to have expert evidence on particular things.
Precisely.
To save the arbitrator. So if you don't know what you're talking about, you're probably going to not only feel exposed, but be exposed at some point. And that's, of course, what we want to avoid. I mean, equally, once the HKIAC clause is in there, they come to us. We do the best we can to be as quick as possible, just to use very sort of general terms, because we know that's generally what crypto cases want. Equally, if both parties are represented by sophisticated legal representatives and the respondent party wants to engage in antics, for want of a better term, that is also part of the process, and we do what we're supposed to do within our institutional mandate, but there's an element of that there as well.
For sure. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for being with us, Sophie.
I see we don't have further questions. I'll give you a couple of more seconds if there's anything from the participants. I guess not. So all I can do is to thank Mariel for being with us today and sharing all this valuable information that we cannot find when we Google it. So she's a very, very valuable source for us. And we look forward to see the official statistics and hopefully to get some more insights from there. And of course, we got to keep in touch and see how the sector evolves in the coming years. And if you are in Hong Kong for the ICA event, please feel free to reach out to Mariel and discuss more on the topic if you're passionate about.
Thank you for the plug for ICA, Mihaela. We're doing that wherever possible at the moment. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak. I really enjoyed this. Thank
you. I wish everyone a lovely day or a lovely afternoon, and hope to see you to the next ArbTech webinars. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.